Welcome to the Freddie Kissoon Show. All I'm saying, next time, bring the evidence. All you do, you come here, corruption. Just here. Next time you come here, bring your stuff. I am not talking about that. I'm talking about you in 2024, December, saying there's corruption. Bring it.
Let me ask you this question. I would like to ask the AG to propose legislation for what we call small claims court. There are lots of poor people, to an example you just gave, that they have issues with others and sometimes with large firms, but the lawyer fee is greater than the fee you're claiming.
It is their right.
Yes.
Unlike the right that someone has, all of our rights exist in context.
What is the context of a second medical opinion?
Because you disrespected the process.
No.
Jesus, this is common sense, man.
Any situation which you seem to do, you're just dealing with Afro-Guyanese issues. If one, you can't bring and pull the leaders of the African community together, you're failing. And if two, you can't put forward a future, a blueprint, and a plan for African Guyanese, you're failing as well.
On here? Good evening. Pleasant Wednesday evening to you. This is the Freddie Kissoon Show with co-host Leonard Craig. He made headlines in 2020, and I think it's fair to say from 2020 onwards, he became a well-known name in Guyana. We've had him here, I think, 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago, but the campaign is now heating up. And in our studio this night, in the hot seat, is the leader of the Liberty and Justice Party. Many people in 2020, quite a number of people, saw it as the Amerindian Party and its head, Leonard SHUMAN. They won over 2,000 votes, and in a journalist situation, he went into Parliament for just over a 2-year period. Now, as I said, the campaign is heating up, and we will ask LENOX where or which direction is the Liberty and Justice Party heading, which direction he is heading in. He's already publicly said he's endorsed President Irfan Ali. But one of the things I want to ask him about, because I was sent this Facebook posting by him in which he took strong sympathy with what's happening in Gaza and did take a no-nonsense observation about the West and its moral standards. That means of all our official practicing politicians, Leonard SHUMAN has come out against what is happening in Gaza. So, without further ado, welcome to Leonard Craig and welcome to Leonard SHUMAN. Lennox, the Portugal, thanks for being here again.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, I want to start, Lennox, with Joretta Finance, because I think that name will keep cropping up wherever you go. The PNC has showcased her and is showcasing her as the Amerindian prime ministerial candidate that has brought diversity. You were long-standing Tushao, and then you formed your own party, which for all intents and purposes was to seek the Amerindian people votes. You got over 2,000. Is Joretta Finance an enduring figure in the Amerindian community? And since you will be campaigning in the election, can she win Amerindian people's votes?
Freddie, I like your approach, direct, straight to the point. I have a tremendous amount of respect for all of my previous colleagues in Parliament. I have a tremendous degree of respect for all political parties because it shows that there are many people who are passionate about Guyana and what Guyana can be. Maybe some people have different approaches to it. That being said, I have sat in Parliament with many figures, both from the opposition, my opposition colleagues, and also from the government side. And I think that the people that I look at for the kind of leadership, or that I would have looked at historically for the kind of leadership, would have been like the Don Hastings and the Sidney Allicocks. Obviously, Caroline Rodriguez, Her Excellency Caroline Rodriguez, Viber de Souza, all of those notable figures would have been there. I don't see within the indigenous context and, based on what we've done on the ground and how we approach people and talking to people, Geretta's name is not a name that comes up. I think if you're to look at diversity and wanting to ensure that indigenous peoples understand the dynamics of your party and to shed that very racist view or the racist approach that the PNC has always tend to trumpeted or have trumpeted historically, they should have looked at the Don Hastings and say, you know what, we welcome our indigenous peoples. Why don't we bring Don Hastings as an indigenous person? If their intent was to capture indigenous votes, I think a Don Hastings would have been a bit more of a figure that commands that respect from indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, we saw how the party treated with Don Hastings. She was the general secretary at one point, I think, and then she was discharged. Actually, she resigned because the party did not see it fit to operate with integrity. So Don resigned. And even at this last convention or launch that they did not even offer her a second on stage to go and speak anything about indigenous peoples. So it obviously shows what the PNC is all about and how they intend on approaching national development and I'd say integration of the 6 nations of Guyana.
Will you be campaigning in the indigenous districts, enclaves, and parts of Guyana?
Freddie, when we launched the Liberty and Justice Party, yes, I'm an indigenous person. It was birthed out of indigenous people's interests. But we were a national party. We campaigned in the mandatory minimum 6 regions to be able to field a presidential candidate. So we never really had a very indigenous-centric approach. Many people said, Lennox, why don't you bring out an Amerindian party, right? Focus more on the Amerindian people. That will be the tip of the spear. And I sat down with these very same people and I said, Guyana has too much ethnic division already, right? You've got people who look at the 2 larger parties as very ethnocentric. I said, Guyana does not need that. What we need is to continue down a road of national, I'd say, to ensure that our national identity gets respected in politics. And I have seen, and we'll get to this, and I have seen that while we may have approached it that way, there was already a political party that already had that within their mechanism, which is the People's Progressive Party Civic. And that is one of the reasons, that is one of the big draws that I have to the party. They don't just look at one strata or one demographic. They look at all of Guyana and they try to bring everyone in.
But you're a known face in the indigenous community. We don't have a majority race in this country. So any political party will want to put forward their candidates, their representatives who can harness votes in a particular area. For example, I go in the Amerindian community. It would be pertinent for me, to think me or Craig or somebody can outdo you, Leonard Schumann, in an Amerindian area. So I'm asking you, is Geretta finance a factor to be put in the equation among Amerindian voters?
I think there are certain things that maybe need clarity, Freddie. When we go into indigenous communities and across the country, and I've been on the road already with some colleagues, and we're not
This is recently?
Yeah, recently. And we're not speaking about indigenous peoples directly, because indigenous peoples have seen. What we do is we go out there and ensure that the communication aspect of it, of what the government has done for the country, is properly communicated to those communities, to the people. So when we go in there, it is not one of the things that the People's Progressive Party Civic has done is that they've tried their utmost to distance themselves from race-based politics. And when I spoke to the General Secretary, he said, look, Lennox, what we have made a commitment to the people to do, we have done it. All we have to do now is ensure that people understand where those commitments are, how far they're completed, and ensure that they understand what it is that we have down the road. We don't play this race-based politics bit. And I take that very same message and go to those communities. And not only myself, I mean, there are many regions where indigenous peoples live, and indigenous peoples don't really go and campaign in those regions, right? All of the ministers or all of the party, what I say cluster heads as they call them, they all have specific regions. And in those regions, as you know, indigenous peoples are in all 10 regions. And there are only so many indigenous peoples, I'd say, at a level that can go and transmit that message. So in all of the other regions, you've got non-indigenous peoples going in there and saying, look, this is what we are about. This is what the party has committed to and had previously committed to, and this is what we're going to continue to do.
I don't know.
So to go back to your question, you know, I don't hear much about Juretta Fernandes when I go into communities. We ask, you know, are there issues that we have left unresolved or that you would like to see come up in the next manifesto? But Juretta's name is not one that's at the tip of people's tongues.
I want to ask you if you know what you have in common with him racially or ethnically. Bet you don't know. His mother-in-law is pure indigenous. An indigenous woman, purely, not half indigenous. Anyway, Leonard, you didn't know that.
I didn't know that. Yeah. I would have said he is probably half indigenous.
Not at all. Or that I know of. But yeah, my family is.
Can't trust your parents.
Well, actually, my father was a policeman, and he roamed the earth of Guyana.
And he was flirtatious.
I wouldn't use those words, you know, but I've heard stories. Let's put it that way.
Anyway.
Yeah. Freddie asked you earlier if you will be featured in Amerindian communities, and you said that you were a national party. But the difference here is how the results have manifested. I understand you're saying you're a national party and you want to reach out to all races and demographic groups. But the manifestation of your politics is that you draw majority support from Amerindian enclaves. And it will somewhat make sense, I would believe, for you, because you're now campaigning with the PPP, and PPP is a very, very large ensemble. How wouldn't it make sense then for you, on behalf of the PPP, to concentrate on these enclaves? Because it seems as though the majority of your support base, or the people who like you the most, come from those communities.
But somebody have to bring in the Hindu, Muslim, indigenous votes.
So I was at the People's Progressive Party. So they had a cricket match on the weekend up in Albion. I went up there and I'm interacting with people. And surely enough, non-indigenous peoples from up in Borbies are saying, Mr. Schuman, we would love for you to come into our community. And I hear that across the country, not only in indigenous communities. I think one of maybe the expectation is that because I'm indigenous, I will draw indigenous votes. I think maybe that might be a bit of, I don't want to say misconception, but I don't want to lean too heavily.
Can I stop you a little? I'm talking about...
Understood. I don't want to lean too heavily into that.
Right.
Right. I understand that historically my support base would have been indigenous communities. Right. I totally get that. And of course, I'm going to go to indigenous communities. I'm going to go to every single community that I have the time to. And that focus is not only in indigenous communities, but the message has to be transmitted. And the party also has a structure whereby that message has to go out. I'm simply a mode of delivery in some communities. But like I said, people in Albion are asking if I could go up there. I spoke to Dr. Ashley Singh, who is responsible for up there. And he said, absolutely, Lennox, when you're ready, if the people are asking to see you, let's go up. And that is, Albion is not an indigenous community, right? There are communities, Betoho, Betovo acting, all along the coast where you have non-indigenous communities, and yet these people still want for me to go in there. It means now that the support base in itself is not confined to indigenous peoples. The support base is confined to people, well, I wouldn't say confined, the support base says actually encapsulates people who have seen what Guyana was and what Guyana is and what they want Guyana to be, and they want to ensure that that message is not lost.
Okay, fair enough. Your politics is shaped by what philosophy would you say, generally speaking? Do you consider yourself, as some people in the AFC used to call themselves, I think they call themselves, well, they didn't have a defined philosophy. They refer to themselves as free thinkers or whatever. Do you have a philosophy that drives what you do politically?
I could have, I have so many different approaches to that. My simple philosophy, or I'd say my governing philosophy, is to ensure that the inclusive Guyanese society thrives. And a big focus on the word inclusive. Guyana's development must include every single Guyanese. It must include every single ethnic group. It must include every single religious group. It must include every single economic class. And when I look once again at what Guyana is, there's only one political party that I'd say encapsulates all of those, and that is the People's Progressive Party Civic. So when I look at what I have as my governing principles, they're very much aligned with what the PPP puts out there, and what they are.
Then that makes it two parties, the LJP and the PPP.
Why does it make it two party? Why can it not be one party that the LJP supports the PPP?
Okay, no, because I'm saying your philosophy and
it does not
align with
it does not differ from the PPP.
Okay. I hear you. You
go ahead.
Right. Now, you, from time to time, you do make statements and so on, several on social media, but you have not been in the forefront of our politics in a forceful way. You've kind of been just measured over time.
Hold me loose, man?
Why? Well, old people used to use that term.
What's the term? Hold me loose.
When you're not
yeah. Sometimes right. Sometimes you hear and you're not a consistent presence.
In other words, what he's trying to say, there's no consistent graphic presence.
Right.
But I guess you will explain that.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. One can be a presence in so many ways, right? And I tell people this, that there are a lot of things that I can do, and I have done. Being part of the Law Reform Commission, for example, being one of those. When I was in Parliament supporting the People's Progressive Party Civic. And you don't want to be accused of betraying the trust of the people early on in the game. And also, in some instances, I simply wanted to put my head down and get the work done. Because all the time I spend in the public and going to fight public battles, it detracts from the real essence of why I'm here. I am here to ensure that, once again, we make a difference for all Guyanese. And if I'm outside there fighting public battles and beating my chest and making fantastically wild statements, it means that I'm not focused on what the task at hand is, which is to achieve results. So I've been I'm very results oriented. I'm also very disciplined in terms of my time management. If I say I'm going to get something done by a certain time, that is within my control, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
Then I'm going to get it done. And I want to touch back on something that, Freddie, I don't know if I would have gotten, or maybe you asked a question about indigenous peoples. Of course, I am going to ensure that my indigenous peoples are included in any structure. And I'm going to support the People's Progressive Party Civic because they have built the structure. They have already built the inclusive mechanism for indigenous peoples and all Guyanese. And if I'm there to enhance that or to support it, then I'm fully on board with that. Because I know that they take a very I'd say, a very holistic approach to development across Guyana.
Right. You therefore see the PPP as the vehicle through which your activism can make the strongest impact on our national political culture. Do you see it any other way, or it is just this moment in time that satisfies this? In other words, is there an LJP after the elections? Is there a configuration where the LJP continues outside of the PPP rail upon which it is traveling now?
When we started off the Liberty and Justice Party, we started off, in my humble view, on a very flawed premise. And you have to remember that was my first foray in national politics. I didn't have the kind of background knowledge of political parties, of how they functioned, of their... For me, manifesto was, the only manifesto I could think of was the Communist Manifesto. And, because I had to do that in school, I had to do research on it to present it at school. And so when I came back to Ghana, I hear manifesto, I kept thinking, well, is everyone going back to the Communist Manifesto? Because it's got stuck that way. And I came in with this flawed idea that there may not be parties that look out for indigenous peoples. And I have no apologies about that, about where we started off in 2020 and what we did in 2020. Because I strongly believe, and I may not be a religious man, but I'm a very spiritual person. And when I look at it, and I would say that my ancestors would have guided me to a point where they say, no, this is not the time to get that done. It's not the time to jump in, because there's a greater purpose. And that greater purpose was to ensure that 2020 yielded the results for the people. It is after that that I sat down with my colleagues in Parliament, and bit by bit, all the falsities started to fall away. Because then you look at what the PPP was offering, how they approach policies, how they approach community development, how they approach national development, how they approach national identity, their foreign policy, all of these things. And then you start to sit there and you say, hold on a sec. I may have been completely wrong when I hopped into this. And I recognize that. I make no apologies about that. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I will apologize for it. So when I came in, like I said, it was flawed. And bit by bit, as it started to unfold, I really see and understand. So getting in with the PPP and supporting them helps us to achieve what we set out to do with the Liberty and Justice Party. I've said it before, we're over 87% aligned in our manifesto and what we had committed to the people. So that is a very, very strong alignment. Why now am I going to go and fight just for, maybe not even 13, it's 12 point something percent. Why am I going to go and fight for that? When you're going to have differences, right? Even in a marriage, you're supposed to be one, but you still have differences at home. You're not perfectly aligned all the time, so that is the reality. What happens post elections 2025, it is yet to be determined. We are going to have a discussion about that. But it's not something that we look at. We look right now at how do we ensure that the people understand what the party has delivered, that they have fulfilled their commitment, and what is in store. We don't sit there and, as as Nigel Hughes says, we don't share the corn before we even get the corn, right? And when I went and saw the General Secretary, Dr. Jack Dio, I didn't go in there with an expectation. I didn't go in there asking for a commitment. Right? I simply said, look, Chief, I'm willing to work with the party to ensure that you guys are victorious in 2025. What can I do? And he was very clear. He said, look, Lennox, I want to ensure that you know this. We don't promise any single person a single office when they come to campaign for us, not even the ministers of government. I said, that's fine. I have no qualms about that. I'm not coming in here asking for something. The only thing that I want to do is to ensure that the PPP is victorious in 2025. And that's it.
Freddie, a slight teachable moment. You want to tell the viewers was the Communist Manifesto? Quickly.
That's irrelevant. That's one of the most famous books by Karl Marx. In which it explains what communism is about. It's perhaps Marx Marx wrote some very erudite philosophy texts, but he's best known for the little booklet, the Communist Manifesto, which in the 19th and 20th century, next to the Bible, was one of the most famous books in the Western world.
That created the global division.
Global economic division. Right?
I didn't have you said something, and I zoomed in on it right now, and so it becomes a question. You made a reference to Nigel Hughes and the coin before. What you want to explain that?
Well, Nigel, often in some of these instances in commentary, I think historically, and you could correct me if I'm wrong because you were part of the machinery. He said, well, how is the corn going to share? And that's where the reference comes from. You're sharing the corn before you even get to the harvest.
Right. I think he wrote an extended piece on that.
So when they're sitting there devising, all right, well, how many seats will I get in this arrangement, right? What am I going to get? Am I going to get these ministries, right? You're dividing some things before you even have something to divide.
Wasn't that one of the sticking points in the negotiations with him and the PNC? That his claim that you're asking for this, asking for that, the campaign hasn't begun, you haven't even cemented a covenant, and you're asking for this to be shared out, that to be shared out. Isn't that one?
I think it may have been. And Freddie, I think, look, when you look at their covenants and how it is, right? Look at the Herbmanson Accord. Look at what they had committed to do, and look what the end results were. So it doesn't matter what covenant APNU and AFC and PNC and any other party comes up with. That covenant will always be broken. It will always be dominated by the PNC. When you look at the arrangement with LGAP, ANOG and TNM, we had a covenant. At least in my view, I saw it as a covenant. And ANOG and TNM sought to betray that covenant. That is something that I really, really, that has eroded my, I'd say my trust in some of these covenants that these political parties are signing. Look at this issue with ANOG and T. Mohammed, right? They sat there and they say, well, we're not going to coalesce. But now, all of a sudden, ANOG finds himself in a position where Ralph Ramkran resigned. Correction. ANOG, under new leadership, said, you know what, we're going to join Team Mohammed's and launch this party, get this party. Within 12 hours, Ralph Ramkran, one of our premier constitutional lawyers in the country, resigned. Another very prominent attorney, Timothy Jonas, senior counsel, resigned. Amanza Walton Desir, who is also an attorney, does not want to be associated with that. But yet here you've got Mark DeFrance, who wants to take ANOG and drop them in the bucket with Team Mohammed.
But he has done that.
Right. So, and when they started off, they said, no, we're not going to coalesce with anyone. But here you are. And not only did you opt to coalesce with someone, you opt to coalesce with a sanctioned individual. Why? Just because the money? Because the money is sweet? Because your party does not have money? There are other burning issues, right? You've got members of ANOG who are dual citizens, and they would rather sit there and push people to the front and say, no, buddy, I happy working in the background, right? I am here to, right, I'll do my work. And
well, I think there were only two. Timothy Jonas and Kian
Jabour, right. So, and
Kian Jabour was who...
And I don't know if Nadia is also part of the...
But she resigned. Nadia say God.
Well, there you go.
She's resigned.
All right.
But Kian Jabour is still in ANOG, which means he's still...
So here's the thing.
He's still in politics.
So here's the thing. If Kian Jabour is going to stand there and push you in the fire, say, no, you go and feel the fire hot. I'm going to push you. I'm going to do everything to ensure that, we cool down the fire and just keep pushing and pushing. Why does the membership not ask him and say, Kian, hold on a sec. Why are you pushing me in the fire? Why don't you give up your Canadian citizenship and come in the fire with us? Then we will all know if it's hot. The issue is that these guys feel comfortable at home, speaking from some podium or some live or something somewhere, without bringing any risk to themselves. That is the reality. It is very detestable and very hypocritical.
Well, you did the right thing. Everybody knows that. You give up your Canadian citizenship.
Freddie,
Why don't you ask him? Why don't you write a letter in the press saying, Kian, please give up your citizenship the way I did? That'd be a good letter.
Freddie, I have always sought.
But you're saying it here now.
I've always sought to operate above board for everything that I do. And there are people who probably don't approach things the very same way. I don't know who they are. I mean, we talk about, we could talk about a lot of things. But we talk about people's integrity. If there's one thing that I've tried my utmost to do to preserve the integrity that I have had, it took me 52 years to get here, and I'm not going to go and throw it away just for one event or one thing. It has to be worth it. And to me, Guyana is worth it.
You mentioned earlier that you had an encounter meeting with the General Secretary of the PPP. Before that meeting, during, or any time after, have you conceptualized in your head, have you ever thought of approaching, instead of you moving over to the PPP, asking for some sort of a coalition agreement, some formal agreement? Have you ever thought of it? Have you ever thought that that could possibly be an approach?
Well, let me be
as
clear.
An alternative to what up there now?
Let me be clear. There is no sidestepping it. I didn't go on some coincidental meeting interaction. I met with the Vice President, the General Secretary, many times. And most of those things were centered around national development. We have never sat down and say, look, why don't we bring the LJP onto this? And no, we're not, at least in my view, that is not the approach that would serve the people.
Okay.
The People's Progressive Party Civic has a program that includes all Guyanese. They have an economic development plan. They've got a foreign policy. They've got, remember, this is the oldest party in the country, the most transformative party in the country. So they've got structures that I think even you could bring any other person in and they may not even be able to conceptualize it. Why? Because they've got the depth of leadership. And one thing that I told, and I digress a bit, but I'll get back to the point. One of the things that I tell people is that there's no other political party that has the depth of leadership than the People's Progressive Party Civic. If you're to remove the General Secretary tomorrow, you've got another cadre of leaders that could fill that space. And even if they're so layered with leaders that you could remove layer 1, 2, 3, 4, and even within layers 5, you're still going to find the caliber of leaders within that grouping that could say, you know what, we're going to pick this party up and go with it. And there are some people who don't even want to be part of that structure, but still they're members of the party and they're on the outskirts. Any of those, like the depth of leadership in the People's Progressive Party, it is so deep that there's no single person that could change the course of that party. Yes, you could govern it, you could help to steer it and guide it, but if you're to remove the leader, once again, you've got a whole heap of leaders, a whole lot of them, a whole battalion of leaders that are going to be willing to fill and capable of filling that. So in terms of trying to integrate or trying to coalesce the Liberty and Justice Party, bring them into that, it is not something that has been, at the front of our heads in getting that done. For us, the big thing is how do we achieve for the people? And if we are sitting there and we're going to go and fight, let's fight with a team, not against a team, with a team that is already doing that. Let's see if we can make that team stronger.
A year ago, right around this table, Minister NIGEL said a country should have an opposition. It keeps the government on its toes. 2 weeks ago, on this program, the Minister of Education, Leonard, said a country needs an opposition. It seems sad that for a country that doesn't have an opposition, because I think at the commonsensical level, a country needs an opposition. You don't allow one group without any watchdog to run a country. But on I think sadly we don't have a very vigilant opposition, and it seems to be dimming. What's your view on that?
Freddie, I quite agree with those statements that any government requires a very strong opposition. I think there are some requirements that I would place on that opposition. Is that A, they have to have integrity, they have to be principled, and they have to be on compromise. When you look at, and they also have to represent a national view, right? When you look at what the opposition represents right now, I think that the AFC is all about self-interest, right? And you could go back to Nigel Hughes and being the attorney for ExxonMobil. If you say you're more interested in the country, part ways with the firm, resign, and then take the leadership. This is wanting to eat your cake and have it too situation with him, right? And then you've got the APNU AFC. Well, APNU AFC, when you lump them together, those are the people that tried to hijack the country in 2020. So at no point should they even have a seat at the table. Find room for the new people to come up. But it is not a place where you're going to just come up. You have to be tested. So when you see the People's Progressive Party, Civic, or any other politicos coming out there and talking about other political parties, you have to go through the test. And that test is you have to be able to defend yourself and defend yourself vigorously. Some people look at it as political victimization. Excuse me. Flushing out one's integrity is not victimization. Holding you to account is not victimization. Ensuring that you're in conformity with laws of Guyana is not victimization. Those are standard practice when you go to the US, for example. I use that because they're the ones that a lot of people look at. Before you become a presidential candidate, these people go down and vet all the way down to your grandparents, your great-grandparents, where you came from, what is it that they did, right? And if they find even a hair, they're going to take that hair and try to magnify it. What is wrong with us doing the very same thing? And we're not even going that deep. We're simply doing the topical one where, all right, well, Freddie, you're coming on the scene. Let's talk about your integrity, right? Let's deal with you. And then when we're done dealing with you, if you can't stand that, let's go to what you stand for. And when you start to interrogate parties like this, of course you're going to have operatives who are going to go there, right? They're going to hit you and slam you. You have to be able to withstand some of that stuff. I did it. At least I went through the fire when I had the LJP. I had to defend myself. I had to defend the political party. But I also did that with integrity. And that is what we do not have in the opposition political parties. People with integrity. When you look at the vape party, or what it is,
VPAC?
VPAC, maybe the vape party. When you look at them,
I don't know what that means.
Look at
-PAC.
right. But when you look at some of the principles, one of the principles is starting the party. Why? Because I think his fuel license was revoked. Don't quote me on that. And I'm not going to call name. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
right?
don't.
I will not libel at least this show. Then you've got, I mean, look at T. Mohammed's sanction. Look at who they brought on. Another person who would have violated the law and was suspended from the medical council for 2 years that now sits at the helm of that coalition, right? When you look at what the APNU AFC did in 2020, you do not have a political opposition that has the kind of integrity to withstand anything. So yes, it is good to have an opposition. It is actually great to have an opposition, but that opposition also has to have integrity. And right now you don't have any.
I want to ask you about AZRUDDIN Mohamed. He has, I saw on Facebook several meetings with him in several indigenous communities, and seem to have had reasonable crowd and so on. Do you believe, knowing what you know about these communities, being a former Tushao and so on, do you believe that will translate into ballot box type support? If I give you quickly my own view, is that this guy comes over to people like a celebrity, and people just want to come out and see who this person is and cheer them on as a celebrity. But do you believe that that is translatable into votes?
It's a topic that I've done my utmost to avoid, right? But given the opportunity, permit me at least a little bit of latitude. I think that I'm more prone to follow someone who understands what work is. If someone comes to me and talk about what it is that they're going to do for me, well, show me your hand. Do you have the calluses to say that you have worked a single day in your life? Right? Don't tell me about what you can achieve because you have not done any of that. You have not walked the path. All you have done is skirted your taxes, right? You have smuggled, you have done almost everything. And I don't want to get into the more unsavory things.
You have smuggled? Can we withdraw that word? You have smuggled?
You have smuggled.
No, that's the fact.
That is what the OFAC sanction said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
smuggled gold.
Yeah, you smuggled gold.
Yeah.
At least what I'm told is not only gold, but I won't say the rest.
That is no public fact. So,
yeah, exactly. It's OFAC sanctions I'm talking about, right? Then there is this very unsavory act that happened on Main Street. I will not name that act, right?
Pass off.
So then you've got, you're going to say that you're going to respect the laws of Guyana. You're going to help people to grow, but yet you have skirted the laws of Guyana. You have not worked a single day in your life, right? If you're to feel the man's hand, right? I shook his hands a few times when he went into my community. It's like the man doesn't even tear his own roti, right? So how now are you going to come and tell me that you're going to provide work for me? What kind of work? Work in the smuggling industry? That is, I mean, my mind goes so many directions with that, right? People don't follow, and I don't want to associate him in this context, but I'm going to simply say it as a statement. People don't follow criminals because they want to be good people.
Okay.
People follow criminals because they want to learn criminal behavior, right? And when you look at some of these things, getting into the communities, yes, people see the flash, they see the car, right? People show up because they think that when he shows up, they've seen houses give away, outboard engines give away, cars give away, right? Basically, what he has done is stolen from the people, and now he is metering it back to the people, trying to buy their votes. By skirting $50 million worth of taxes in gold smuggling.
You have to say US, it's not Guyanese.
Right, 50 million
so
US dollars.
Translate that
into
Guyanese.
50 million US dollars into. Now you're taking that money and metering it back to people to buy their loyalty. That's one. But going that direction also, it also shows how much of a low value, low premium that one has for another person to say that you're going to go there and buy them. You know where that happened? That happened after Libya fell, where people were catching and selling people. I think there's a word for it, right? Africans who were brought to Guyana suffered under the same thing. It was called slavery. When you're going to buy someone and sell them. So when you're going into communities and you're buying people and buying their loyalty, I would not say it's equal to, right? Because it's not the same suffering. But essentially what you're telling people is that they're for sale. It shows the premium that you put on people. If I'm going to buy your loyalty for $100,000, that means your value to me is only $100,000, which I find completely and utterly appalling. So when you go to communities, will he get the kind of support? Only the elections will tell. But what I also know is that you could go into a circus, and the circus is full, but not everyone wants to be in it. You could go and watch a train wreck, but not everyone wants to be in a train wreck. So we have to be very cautious about some of those things too, right? Well, I wouldn't say cautious, but I think watching it from that view, there are it's a very sensitive topic for me because when I look at what he has done in indigenous communities, he has literally bulldozed his way in to some of those communities without respecting the very same laws that he's talking about, I will restore law and order, I will end. Well, hold on a sec. You're currently breaking the law by going into some of these communities.
Mm-hmm.
The Armenian Act under Part 2 says that you have to have the permission of the councils. Not just because one or two people invite you in means you're going to go in. One or two people is not leading the community.
Mm-hmm.
It would be like if you've got a friend, let's say in the UK, and you say, yeah, man, come to Guyana. And then they get to Guyana, and then they just bulldoze past the immigration officers and say, no, no, my friend Leonard invite me here. You can't tell me to leave.
Mm-hmm.
The law says that the immigration controls who enters and exits Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now that person has to respect the laws of Guyana. Not just because you invite them in, they can come in. It is the same in indigenous communities.
Right.
Not just because a couple of people invite you in means that you have a right to go in. You still have to get the permission of the governing authority, which is the village council. And I will go even further. Indigenous peoples are not opposed to being educated or being politically conscious. Indigenous leaders in themselves, they have always expressed this openness. What we have fought for is for people to simply respect our process, respect the law, and then we are going to have that conversation. I have not seen a single community yet say, you know what, you write to us, we've met as a community, and the community says, no, I have not seen that yet.
Mm-hmm.
So why not go through the process?
Sure.
I'm going out with the People's Progressive Party Civic. We reach out to all of the leaders in the communities that we go to, and we say, look, guys, we'd like to come into your community. Right? Is it okay? When is good? I mean, sometimes we just say, look, we can't say when because we're doing a block. It depends on the availability of transport, flight, right? Logistical issues. So we'll say, look, we're going to be in this cluster at such and such time, right? Are these times okay to come and interact with your community? And they've always said, yeah.
Lennox, I've said this twice. I've said this, what I'm about to say, I've said on this program. Leonard Craig has said it, and I have written it in my columns. I think there was an initial mistake, and a large one, in the PPP leadership just talking about this man. This guy was a playboy that never worked a day in his life and going around driving cars that are worth hundreds of millions of Guyanese dollars. And I think when he give indication that he's going to throw his hat in the ring, I think the best thing to do was to ignore him. Now, for example, 28 parties went to GCOM and registered with GCOM. We don't know John Smith and Terence Singh from those parties because we're not talking about them. So nobody knows them. And Lennox, I think that was a mistake. That was a strategic mistake, and just keep talking about a man who was a political nonentity.
I can't speak for other people, Freddie, but I think the Vice President and General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party Civic has made it very clear when he started off. He said, look, I don't go about talking about individuals, right? Let them do what they want to do. But when you come and attack the People's Progressive Party Civic, I am the General Secretary of this party, and I have a responsibility to defend us and defend our work. So the first salvo was when I think he went to Barbies and he started to attack the government about not doing enough for sugar workers. And I think he said that the Minister of Agriculture was not doing his work or something like that. That is when the General Secretary came out and said, no. That is off limits. When you get into the political ring and the arena, then you want to have this out, let's have it out. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to come and attack the good work that we have done without giving us an opportunity to defend ourselves. And the Vice President, let's talk about it politically. The General Secretary has been very, very consistent. Then when he came on the political scene, then that is when he said, all right, well, now you've thrown your hat in the ring. Let's get on it. Right? Let's get on the field, and we're going to talk politics. Let's deal with politics substantively.
All right. I just want to go back to something you mentioned just now, because I listened to Issues in the News last night with the AG, and he did mention certain things about having to get permission because that is the law. And a thought came to my mind, and I said I needed to ask you today when you're here. Don't you think that after nominations day, when the candidates are accepted, legally accepted as running for office, don't you think the law should make a provision that once you're listed as a presidential candidate for a party, you should be able to freely go into even reservations, obviously communicating with them, of course, not just turn up, but, send a letter probably in advance, 2 days, 3 days, whatever, sometime. But don't you think each and every presidential candidate should have that privilege to be able to go respectfully, of course? Because if we maintain the permission thing, then larger parties can use councils that are favorable to them to keep out the voice of other. What do you feel about something like that?
Leonard, how do you feel about me showing up in your house at midnight tonight?
Providing you give me...
How about I show up at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Is that the right analogy?
No, hold on a sec.
No, that is exactly what I'm going to say.
Right. So
Not the right
you're going to say provided that, but your family may not be comfortable with it, right?
Yeah, but my family is public, is private.
Exactly. Hold on.
Yeah.
Don't be impatient. I ask you that because your family, the minute I step to your yard, that is considered private property.
Okay.
You own that property. That is your keep, whatever it measures. Indigenous peoples enjoy communal ownership of the reservation. The entire reservation is private property. So why should the private property laws apply to you but not to Indigenous peoples?
No, it's not private property.
It is private property, Freddie.
Legally?
Legally it is. All Indigenous reservations,
Are you sure?
It is private property communally held by Indigenous peoples.
There isn't some provision where the state...
I am 1 million...
The state could, police officers...
No.
Government...
That is completely incorrect. I am 1,000,000% sure. There are very specific provisions under which government can go in. Even the police can't just barge into your yard.
That's not the right analogy.
Right, Freddie, it is 1,000,000% the right analogy. The police has to get a search warrant from a court of competent jurisdiction to execute a search on your yard because that is private property. It is the same way in Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities...
The Amerindian Act says that?
Freddie, that is a matter of law, private property law.
I thought the state had ultimate...
No, the state does not... Indigenous leaders could put out the president if they wanted to.
No.
Leonard, I'm telling you, Indigenous leaders, if
in
they
his
do not...
capacity as president.
Absolutely.
No.
Absolutely.
No.
That sounds hard to take.
No. That is... I am telling you that Indigenous leaders can put a president out of their community if they want.
The president and his cabinet should have an exception. Well, okay.
And the security forces.
In other words, I hear you. I don't want
to... the Armenian Act says. Part 8 says that you're permitted to go in and look at only government structures. That is it, right? And they list pretty much what those things are. The president and himself cannot go into that community. The police, before they go in, are supposed to inform the Tushao, and if the Tushao says no, don't come in now,
But that's what I wanted to know.
Unless there's
they
a
still have
murder
to ask
something.
permission. But if the Tushao says no,
you can't just barge in. You have to go to the court and get a search warrant, and then come back and say, I've got this warrant. It is private property.
Right. So, private property, but citizens of Guyana still live there.
Private property.
Who has to vote?
Your family lives in your house. They still have to vote. Do I just barge into your house?
Wrong analogy.
I am thinking it's the wrong analogy too.
No.
But
you see,
I hear you.
This is the issue: is that people seem to think that because it is wide open land, that they have a right to go in anywhere in Guyana. But that's completely false. The entire reservation is private property. The head of that house is the Tushao and the councillors.
So how you determine who are members of this house reservation?
The village council and the village community does that. But you have to be an Amerindian. You have to be from that community. You have to have ties to the community. Just the same way that if you have a son or daughter and they marry someone, they now become part of your house. In indigenous communities, it is the same way. If someone from the community marries someone from outside and they bring them in, then they're now seen as part of the community. That is the reality.
So, if at the time, we digressing a little from politics, but let me ask you this.
No, but I find this, I did not know
but it needs to be
Amerindian reservations legal in the legal statute. Well, in the statutes are legal. In the Amerindian Act, on the statute books, I did not know until now, July 2025, that legally that's private property.
Freddie, all Amerindian communities.
I thought the state could have gone in. I thought
all Amerindian communities are given a certificate of title. Title to that land. If you have a title to something, what does that mean? It means now that you...
No, I thought there was a residue of authority for the state.
No, the residue of authority is listed in the Amerindian Act. That is clear. As I've said before, a village leader can put out the president if they so choose.
I find that disturbing.
Not disturbing. Look, you have to remember, right now we are sitting on my family's ancestral land, the entire coast. We have not said, you know what, we want to come and take Georgetown because it is unrealistic. But what we have said is, look, we've got our private property. We just don't want for you to infringe on it. And we have to exercise our degree of what we call, not necessarily the immigration, but the visitation process to that community. And it has to be within the confines of the law.
Okay, so I didn't realize, and I got to verify this for myself, that it is this level of private property that these reservations are.
Lennox, I want to check into that.
I would
check into that. But you know one thing, Freddie, I have to caution you, both of you. There's this inherent superiority complex that resides in non-indigenous peoples, and I'm seeing it exhibited.
Right.
Had it been a non-indigenous person sitting here and telling you this, I bet that you wouldn't be sitting here telling me, well, I gotta go and check it.
No, that is not so. That's not so.
No,
that's not so.
If you feel so, I apologize.
I want to make
I am not like that.
I want to make sure that I register that concern because I've seen it very, very many times manifested in the same manner.
No, but I am, first of all, I'm not like that. And it's just that my nationalism and patriotism seem to not to gel with that part of the law.
Right. That is all.
Okay.
I feel the same way.
Thanks for the clarity.
That's all.
And that is why I asked the question. I'm not talking about anybody who feels to walk into walking, but that is why I asked the original question, that if you don't feel the law should make some accommodation, that once you declare the presidential candidate, by law, by statute, GCOM accept you're on that thing, at least the presidential candidate communicate with the village and say, here, look, I would like to come in, or I'm coming in on this particular day, or whatever you, and you would hope that there is some communication as to, similar to giving permission, but how it should be in the law, as I would think, is that while you communicate and thing, it wouldn't be normal practice for the village to refuse. I am just thinking that is a fair way of giving all candidates access.
The operator said 2.5 minutes left.
I completely and utterly disagree with that.
You disagree with that?
Absolutely. Okay. It is private property, and the leadership of that community has a right to say who they want and who they do not want. It does not prohibit members of the community from coming out and attending.
But he was talking about in an election context.
Understood. But it is the same thing. There are some parties you don't want coming and sitting at your table.
No, man. Wrong analogy.
No,
I believe it's wrong analogy too. But I hear you.
It is private property. If I were to come and sit at your table, I'm invading your private property. So there's no election law that should give me permission to go and do that. None.
So how do parties meet and communicate their message in a democracy to people in a reservation?
Reach out to the council. Once again, that authority resides with the leadership of that community. That is not for me to say nor me to impose. And no law should want to be seen as imposing politics on communities. We don't prohibit people from being associated with political parties. But in certain circumstances, in certain instances, political parties can be very disruptive in communities. They can divide them so much.
Right.
If you look at what these guys did in Wiki Kalkuni, they simply barged into a community event with their flags and waving it in the to-show face. Imagine if someone from Trinidad barged into Guyana and went to, or let's say Venezuela, barged into Guyana, went to the president and started waving the Venezuelan flag. What do you think the effects would be?
Well, no, that analogy is
right.
That analogy is all right.
But what
that analogy is all right.
Freddie,
what they did there,
we cannot pick the things that are convenient to us and only deal with those things. We also have to comply with the laws that we feel uncomfortable with. Why? Because those laws are meant to protect indigenous peoples. I know we've got a minute, but when you look at those communities, once again, we do not prohibit people from being associated with any political party. But the leadership also has a responsibility to protect the community. And when people are going to come in as disruptive forces, people are free to come out and say, you know what, I want to go and see what these guys are all about. By all means, you have that political liberty. But you're not going to go and invite a criminal into your house the same way village leaders should not invite criminal elements into the community. Because, once again, it is private property.
Lennox, we operate the signal over time. The campaign is heating up. The PPP is launching their campaign on the weekend at Kitty, and we'd like to have you as part of a panel analyzing the dimensions to come of the election campaign. Thanks for being with us. You're always welcome on this program.
Freddie, thank you.
Yeah,
and, you know, provided that, you know, I'm not otherwise engaged, you know, I'd sit there and talk to the General Secretary under who I work now and see if that's a possibility.
Okay. Thanks for being with us. You were watching our long interview with a person who needs no introduction, Leonard SHUMAN. Thanks for being with us. We will see you on Friday when we'll have another guest. Catch you later. Bye-bye.